Well, hello. I'm sitting on the couch today because I wanted to be comfortable. Okay, now that we have that out of the way. So, since the last time I made an update about the movie release schedule and all that stuff, even more news has come out because this is an ever changing situation. But I wanted to talk about two very specific, pretty big changes that happened. Even as I was preparing to do this video, the Paramount decrees are completely out the window now, and I talked about those a bit briefly in a video a couple months back. So I'm not actually going to go into that because that's a whole other can of worms, and someone could probably explain it better than I can. But I'm going to talk about two pretty big changes, or deals, I guess, that were struck and things like that. Uh, the first one I'm going to talk about is this $30 to rent Mulan decision that Disney made. And then the second is going to be the 17-day theatrical window that AMC and Universal came to their agreement. So let's start with Mulan. So, Disney had I guess their second quarter or their third quarter financial call with their investors and their stockholders. And during that call, they announced that after this sort of back and forth about pushing back Mulan's release date, because Mulan was originally scheduled to be released at the tail end of March, and there were already press screenings. I believe they already had the premiere as well. So some people have seen this film. And then the pandemic happened, and so they pushed it back to the summer. And Mulan and Tenet were sort of kind of jockeying back and forth for which would be the first blockbuster or really big movie that would reopen theaters and hopefully bring in audiences who were shy to come to the movie theaters, when we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Where Warner Brothers, or more specifically probably Christopher Nolan, but Warner Brothers wanted Tenet to really be there, and Disney did not want Mulan to be first. They kind of wanted, like, you go ahead, Warner Brothers, and then we'll be the next one after that. We want all the theaters to sort of do a test run of their new procedures and shit and make sure there's no problems, and then we'll throw in Mulan here. So they wanted to take a step back and be like a week or two after Tenet, for the most part, that as far as how the release schedule shifting had been done. But even more importantly, Disney wanted a lot more international theaters to be open, especially in China, because obviously Mulan is a Chinese folktale. Is that proper? Is it a folktale? Is it based in truth? I actually don't know that much about the Mulan story. That wasn't one of my more favorite Disney animated films. But they really wanted that international money because they figured they were going to make a lot more internationally than they were domestically, and that probably played a little bit into this decision. But also, Disney's kind of hurting. Now, let's put that into focus. Disney's not like in danger of declaring bankruptcy or anything like that. Obviously, they're still probably the most successful film company right now, especially since after they bought Fox, as far as their library titles and all that stuff. Disney Plus, I think they announced that they had like 60 million unique subscribers to that service, and they just had Hamilton and The Mandalorian, and so that streaming service seems to be doing, pretty well there. Even when they gave like a free year to Verizon subscribers, like my Disney Plus is just mooching off of my fiance's that she got for free from being a Verizon customer. I'm track phone all the way, but so they're doing well on that, but they're hemorrhaging money on the theme parks because California is still closed based on the governor's orders, and that it's a hot spot. Florida is also a hot spot, but that governor doesn't give a fuck how many of his citizens die. Gee, a state with horrible humidity to keep particles in the air, and a bunch of old people who go there to retire. Of course, let's not shut that state down. But those parks are open, but they're still, they're not, people aren't flying to go to Disney right now, and obviously, if people do want to go to Disney, it's a restricted, lesser experience, because a lot of the side carts, a lot of the shows and stuff, they're not running because of the pandemic. They still have the rides, and they put up the extra plexiglass and all that shit. So it's mostly a lot of locals, and unlike California, where probably the vast amount of people who go to Disneyland on any given day are more locals than they are travelers. Disney World is the opposite. It's mostly travelers. I'm not sure how many Orlando locals have the annual pass there. Probably a few, obviously, but Disney World is the one that most people travel to because it's larger and all that stuff. And Disneyland is more of like the locals or just people on the West Coast who don't want to fly as long. So their attendance is way down, and they also have to like reserve what day they can't just show up to the park and go. So they're not making as much money. So they're making some on Florida, but not nearly as much. Though they did open both of the shopping places, so Disney Springs in Florida and Downtown Disney in California. Those are open for like them, but those are just stores and shit, and a few restaurants where you can like eat outside and things. So that's really hurting them, and a lot of the decisions that are being made as far as whether to hold a film for theatrical release or to dump it to premium video on demand is because, do we need that revenue now? Are we contractually obligated to release it within this window? That sort of thing. Because if the movie's finished, if the movie's finished, you could technically push it back to whenever. But, movies aren't just financed by one company that just throws all the money in and then pays for it. They're usually financed through loans or different production companies, and they front this, and then they need a return on their investment. Sometimes there's an interest involved. There's things like that. So the longer you go without releasing that movie, the longer you go without repaying those investors. And then, there might be interest, there might be penalties, there's a lot of that stuff. So sometimes, even if a movie is ready and they prefer to push it back for a theatrical release, they're between a rock and a hard place. Especially for a movie like Mulan, which is going to have product tie-ins. Doritos wrappers and Funko Pops and all the things that are released as products to help promote the film. Where they have licensing agreements where, they have to put that out. That's why we had a bunch of like food things in the grocery store that had Wonder Woman 1984 on it, because that was supposed to come out in June, so they probably had contracts to start pumping out those products in April and May. And some of those products can be spoilers, especially if they're like Funko Pop toys about specific scenes in the movie and things like that. So there's Mulan stuff already in stores and everything, so how long are you going to push it back? So Disney made a decision to put it to premium video on demand in the United States, and they're still gonna release it in theaters internationally, because there's more theaters that are open internationally, and some of those theaters have started playing more than just catalog titles. I mentioned Unhinged opened in Germany, Peninsula, the sequel to Train to Busan, is playing in some Southeast Asian countries, so it's a little bit, I don't know if it's a little bit safer, but the authorities in those unions believe it is safer, and their COVID rates are a lot lower than the United States' are right now. So they're going to do that. And then domestically, I believe they're going to open Mulan in whatever theaters that will have it. But how they're putting it on premium video on demand is different, because Trolls World Tour from Universal pretty much set what the baseline was going to be for this pandemic, when movies that were earmarked for a theatrical release but could not have a theatrical release, or can only go to drive-ins and a handful of brick-and-mortar theaters, they set this thing where we'll put it on premium video on demand, but instead of the normal between $5 and $9 that a normal new release on video on demand goes for, we're going to do it at the price point of $19.99. Okay. As I've mentioned in many videos before, that's not something I'm willing to pay for one individual movie, considering with subscription plans at movie theaters now, the one lasting legacy of MoviePass, it is a lot cheaper to see multiple films in a theater experience than to just rent this one movie. So even with theaters closed, and the fact that going to the theater and using my subscription is not an option, and my Alamo season pass is paused, I don't feel it's worth it, especially if it's just going to be me here. Now, if I had 5 to 7 crotch goblins, and it's a lot cheaper to rent one movie than to buy a bunch of kids' tickets and take them to some Disney movie, then yeah, maybe it's more cost effective. Or if you share your login to one of these video on demand services with a bunch of other people, and then then maybe it's worth it. Or if you all pitch in or something. But for one person paying $20 for a single movie, not really. And granted, if you go to a theater and you pay for the ticket and you also can't go to the theater without stuffing your face with concessions, you might spend that anyway, but, you know. So Disney's doing theirs a little bit differently, though, because when these premium video-on-demand movies go on video-on-demand, there's multiple places that you can rent them from. You can rent them from Amazon or Vimeo or your cable provider if you have like Spectrum or Cox or whatever. You can rent them from like iTunes. There's a bunch of different vehicles that you can use to rent a movie. And then the provider takes a little bit of the percentage, less of a percentage than they'd give a movie theater, by the way, but the studio will still get most of it. I think it's a 70-30 split, maybe? Actually, it might be more. It might be 80-20. I should do research before I film, right? But I don't. So, so there's that. But the difference is most of those movies, the movies that have been released on premium video on demand, they haven't been high-cost blockbuster things. They've been things like Trolls World Tour, which an animated movie, so it probably cost a little bit more. Scoob, I think those movies both cost probably about like 80 mil or something. Or they've been stuff like the Jon Stewart comedy, which is probably a mid-budget comedy, and films of that nature. Or even Bill and Ted, which they decided to pull the trigger and do that in late August. They pushed that date up a little bit from September 1st. That kind of stuff, yeah, it's pretty easy to make your money back just on premium video on demand. But when you're talking about a movie like Mulan, which cost maybe $200 million, give or take, plus the marketing budget that they already sunk into it in the lead-up to the theatrical release that didn't happen in March, it's a little bit harder to make that money back from premium video on demand, because you might get a decent number of people to spend $20 to rent a movie at home, but not as many as would be willing to spend the average ticket price of $9 to $10 in the United States to go see it in a theater on a big screen, especially if it's a movie like Mulan, which has like battle scenes and stuff like that. It's not just a comedy that you could probably say like, okay, I don't really need a big screen experience for this. I mean, never mind the enjoying a comedy in a room full of people laughing aspect, but you know, as far as just like video and picture quality. So Disney's doing it a little bit different. For Mulan, you can't rent it from just any of these providers. You can only rent it if you already have a subscription to Disney+. So that means that when you rent the movie, Disney is getting 100% of the revenue from that rental. Now, they get the subscription that you're already paying to Disney+, unless you have that free Verizon thing. I forget when that runs out. And then you're paying the money to actually rent it. So you don't have to give a cut to Spectrum or Amazon or Vimeo or iTunes or any of those intermediaries. Disney gets 100% of that. And then their price point for this, again, because of the large budget, because it's a little bit harder to make back $200 million from rentals than it is $80 million or $50 million or $40 million, is $29.99, so $30. So $30 to rent a movie for 48 hours, assuming 48 hours. That's the general rental window that you have. Usually when you rent a movie, you have 30 days to start watching it, and then once you start watching it, you have 48 hours to actually watch it before you can't watch it anymore. That's the general rental model for video on demand. Not just premium, but any video on demand. That seems to be what they've landed on. So, $30. Now, like I said back when Universal made the decision for Trolls World Tour, if it's a kids movie, and Mulan is maybe less of a kids movie because they took out the singing from the animated version. It's more of a straightforward like drama action movie. But I think it was rated PG. Might be PG-13, but I think it was PG. But it's still, the perception of it is still a movie you can let your kids watch. So if it's a movie that's aimed at kids, if this were released in theaters, normally from being a manager of a movie theater for 4 years, I know that it's usually one parent who takes their kids and then their friends' kids, because they got shit duty that day, and they take those 4 to 5 kids with them, and they all go to the movies. Now, if you're buying one adult ticket and 4 to 5 kids tickets, that's more than $30. Plus, all of those little brats are going to need their little Zap pack with their little 16-ounce soda and their little shovel of popcorn and their little bag of fruit snacks, and those are all going to be $6 a piece for them. So you're spending a good, easily triple digits to take all of these fuckers to see some shitty kids movie like Home or The Box Trolls. Sorry, had flashbacks to working at Regal. So, in that sense, for a movie that's aimed at kids, I can understand the hubris of charging $30 for this. I mean, one, if you're a parent and you have kids, let's face it, in the middle of the pandemic, you've probably subscribed to Disney Plus just to shut them up. Hey, every Disney movie that's been released that's not called Song of the South, go ahead and enjoy that, little Susie, little Bobby. So if you pay the $30, you get the rest of the PTA to chip in, and you invite the neighborhood kids over. Then yeah, you're getting a deal. But if you're just an adult, or maybe one adult, or maybe a couple who are childless, because who the fuck wants to have a child in this horrible world? But you're still like a Disney enthusiast, because there's plenty of people my age who they grew up with Disney movies in the neo-golden age of Little Mermaid into the Pixar era, and they like going to the theme parks, and they have Disney nostalgia, but they don't want to be childless, but they want to be childless, and so they can spend all their disposable income on Disney shit. Those people, maybe you'll spend $30 for Mulan if it's two people. That's $15 a piece, and I believe that's the price of a regular movie ticket in like New York City and Los Angeles. But if you're one of those people who have a subscription plan, or you're one of those people who just goes to a movie and doesn't need to stuff their face with overpriced popcorn, then it's 3 times the price of a normal movie ticket for this. And, now, with this film, Disney is expecting, like, hey, we're going to make the international box office from the international theaters that are open, which are definitely a lot more theaters than are going to be open in the United States when they start reopening, kind of. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then we'll have the split box office of premium video on demand rentals and like the drive-ins and the brick-and-mortar theaters that are open and can do stuff with their restricted capacity, and we'll make our money. We'll stop the hemorrhaging from the massive amount of money we're losing on the theme parks being closed or being at very reduced capacity when no one wants to travel, and the investors will stave off until everything goes back to normal, and then we can be a profitable powerhouse again and start releasing our Marvel shit and things like that. So, does this set a precedent, and is this a good move? If you're Disney, yeah, I understand why you've made this decision. You get 100% of the revenue by just keeping it walled in within the Disney Plus world. I mean, obviously, pirating is going to be a problem. For any of these, as soon as a movie ends up on some sort of video demand service, and as soon as some movie ends up on the big screen in some other country, for the most part, it's going to be pirated. That's just the nature of it. But I think Mulan was probably going to be pirated anyway, because it is a big movie and it's going to be released in Asian countries, so you're going to get torrents with the hard-coded Asian subtitles on them. So I think they realized, like, hey, we're not really risking anything more. Like, yeah, we may lose X amount of revenue from pirating and torrenting, but we're still probably going to make just enough from the legitimate stuff that will turn a nice, healthy profit. Like, they definitely had Disney bean counters in a room figuring this all out and deciding that, yeah, we're not going to go the Tenet route and just try for a leggy theatrical release solely. We're just going to do it this way. But also, I don't think Disney's going to make a habit of this, because I still don't think Mulan is going to make as much money, domestically or internationally for that matter, in this manner as they would if they released this back in March and COVID never happened. And I think they also don't want to tarnish the brand, because right now, obviously, we're in extraordinary circumstances, so the stigma of putting something direct to video on demand is not quite there. You could argue that the movies that are choosing to be pushed back entirely versus the movies that they've chosen to push out on video on demand is maybe a bifurcated system of some sort of stigma, because it's like, oh, well, if it were good enough, it could be pushed. But because the theaters or the distributors rather, because the distributors know these movies are a little bit weaker or they're not going to make as much money. Those are the ones being pushed out, and we see that with the Jon Stewart movie that got middling reviews. We see that with The Lovebirds, which got middling reviews. We've seen that with Trolls World Tour, which got middling reviews. Like, none of the movies that have completely bypassed a theatrical run and has gone directly to premium video on demand has exactly lit up Rotten Tomatoes or anything. It's mostly the stuff that the studios are like, okay, the movie's maybe not the best, and the financial upside of holding it in theaters is also maybe not the best because it was never going to be a big blockbuster or anything. We don't even think it'll really be a sleeper hit because of the quality, so it makes sense to just get it out the door and sell it. So there's still that stigma there. So there is the danger that people are going to be like, oh, well, Disney's doing this for Mulan, but they're holding back on Black Widow. Does that mean that Mulan is a weaker film? And since the movie did screen in March, it did have press screenings and a premiere, we do know from some of the reviews, I mean, the reviews were still embargoed, but some people have still shared stuff anyway, even anonymously, and they basically said that the movie is just okay, that it's kind of mediocre. So we also know that Mulan is a bit weaker. Now, maybe it's not Artemis Fowl week, maybe it's not Woman in the Window week, because that movie, Disney's trying to dump that off to Netflix. But it's still not their strongest, whereas maybe Disney's like, you know what, Black Widow is actually a strong film. I mean, no one's seen Black Widow except for the people close to the production and Disney, because that was still too far out to have press screenings, so, you know. So there's that. So, did Disney make the right decision for them? Yeah, probably. Is it going to set a precedent? I don't see it. I mean, unless COVID goes on much longer than we're hoping it will. Like, if COVID starts to die down in the fall, and then everyone decides to ignore everything and get together for Thanksgiving, and go shopping on Black Friday without masks, and then get together for Christmas without distancing and masks, and then we have a huge spike in the winter, then yeah, I don't see this happening for a lot of stuff. But the danger of keeping your premium video on demand stuff walled to your own service, that I can see. Because, you know, Universal is now owned by Comcast, which is a cable company. Warner Brothers owns HBO Max. Most of the big studios have a streaming service. I guess even Universal technically owns Peacock, so they can do that too. You know, Hulu is, well, Hulu's kind of, I mean, it's a little bit Disney, it's a couple TV networks. Hulu's kind of a hodgepodge. I'm surprised Hulu kind of still exists and hasn't been split off and rebranded. But there is the danger that, much like you have to have like 9 different streaming services if you want to see all of these different TV shows, it might be the same for if you want to rent something, just rent something, not even like normally stream it as part of your subscriber package, but if you want to just rent something, you have to already have a subscription package to a bunch of other services, and that would fucking suck. So that's the danger, but, you know. And also, I mean, a lot of it depends on if people do rent Mulan. If people look at $30 and they're like, fuck it. I mean, we know it's going to be free with my Disney Plus subscription in 3, 4, 6 months. You know, maybe I'll just wait. Maybe I'm not a diehard Mulan fan. I can just wait. And so maybe people won't do it. That's quite a possibility. So, there. So let's talk about the 17-day deal between AMC Theaters and Universal. So, obviously, Universal was the first studio to be like, fuck it, we're breaking this window in the pandemic. Trolls World Tour is going directly to video on demand. $20. Here you go. And then that sort of created the COVID model. And then Universal also pissed off theaters again when they decided King of Staten Island was going to go to premium video on demand, and they weren't even going to send it to drive-ins. Because originally it was going to be like video on demand and some drive-ins, which is what they did for Trolls, and then they were like, fuck you! Only video on demand. We don't want to send it to drive-ins or a few brick-and-mortar theaters that are open in Wyoming because no one lives there. So Universal has definitely been the boogeyman of the pandemic as far as shortening the window and sticking it to theaters. But they did end up finally having a deal with AMC. which is not unprecedented, because as I mentioned, in 2015, AMC did make an agreement with Paramount Pictures about a shortening of the theatrical window for two specific films. Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension and Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. It wasn't 17 days, I believe it was like after 30 days, or after it drops to a certain amount of screens, we put it on video on demand, and then we cut you in on the profits. Regal didn't sign up for it, a bunch of other theaters didn't sign up for it, but AMC and a couple others did. So AMC there is a history of AMC cutting deals on the theatrical window to be cut in on the premium video on demand revenue. 17 days, however, that's very short. So basically, if a movie opens on a Friday, now most movies, they have like pre-screenings on a Thursday that they then roll into Friday's numbers to kind of fudge the box office a bit. But if we're counting Friday and not Thursday at 9, then 17 days basically gives you 3 weekends at a movie theater for a movie, and then it goes to video on demand. I believe, according to this deal, it's not pulled from theaters and goes to video on demand. It stays in theaters, but then it will be simultaneously on video on demand. It's basically just 17 days, 3 weekends of exclusivity. Now, again, as I've mentioned, I used to be a manager of a movie theater. So let me tell you a little bit of stuff I know about how movies work in the theater. If you are a blockbuster, if you are a big hit, you can stay in theaters for 1 month or 2 months or even 3 months right up until the day that it gets released on Blu-ray for rental. And sometimes if you're a successful movie, in my theater when I worked there, Force Awakens was still in the theaters even after the Blu-ray came out. I believe American Sniper was too, because my theater was kind of in redneck country, and so a bunch of those fucking American Freedom people like fucking flocked to American Sniper like every fucking weekend for 5 months. Those movies can have legs and they can stay. And even other blockbusters that don't stay that long, they'll still stay for a little bit. The Fast and Furious movies were really popular, again, rednecks. Cars. And other stuff. Other big summer movies, Avengers and things like that, they would still stay longer. But the vast majority of movies that aren't big blockbusters, well, if it's an independent film, sometimes it would only stay 1 weekend in my theater, because my theater wasn't the audience for an independent film. The audience that came to my theater were rednecks and families and in-grade high school children. So independent films did not do very well at my location. So if we got them at all, and most we didn't, but if we got them at all, they were there for 1 weekend and then we dropped them on Thursday. But the average movie, the average non-blockbuster, mid-budgeted movie, your action movie, your comedy, whatever, it would stay 2 weeks, maybe 3, and then we'd kick it to the curb for the new slate. So most movies that are released in theaters don't stay in theaters longer than 3 weekends anyway. And I think that's how they landed on the 17-day math, where AMC is looking and they're like, we weren't going to keep this movie in our theaters longer than 3 weeks anyway. So why do we care? And then after it, if there's the people who decide not to go to the theater because, hey, I can just rent it at home in 3 weeks, well, Universal is going to cut us into the profit there. So it's not like it's those people. We'd still be making money off of those people. So why not? So I get that. And then also, the longer a movie stays in theaters, the less of a cut the distributor, the studio, takes. So, like, the first weekend that a movie is in theaters, the split mostly is about 70-30. Sometimes it's 80-20. Sometimes if it's Disney, it's 90-10. I think with Force Awakens, it was like 90-10, where the studio takes the vast majority of it, and the theater gets a little bit of the cut of the ticket price. Because movie theaters do not make money off of the tickets you buy. If movie theaters had to survive solely on ticket prices, they would have all gone out of business a long fucking time ago. Movie theaters make money off of concessions, and concessions alone. That's why they're so overpriced. And when I first started working at a movie theater, I was like, who actually pays these prices for concessions on a regular basis? Because before I worked at a movie theater, I would get concessions like maybe twice a year if I went on like Thanksgiving or something and I just wanted popcorn. Like most of the time I would just I'd either eat right before or I'd eat right after. I can go 2 hours without stuffing my face. I will not starve to death. But almost everyone who comes to the movie theater bought a concession, and I've done the reconciliation at the end of the night. I've done the inventory at the end of the night. I've looked at the final totals. Yeah, 90% of people who come into the movie theater, they buy something for concessions, and that shocked me. Like everyone would come up and they'd be like, "These prices are highway robbery. How dare you? You people should go to hell. I will take 10 of those." And I'm like, "What the fuck? We charge this much because you'll pay it, you fucking idiot." There's a Target across the street. Why are you spending $7 on M&Ms? I don't know. Whatever. Now, granted, now that I go to Alamo, which has like chicken wings and good beer, I get concessions a lot more. But that's because they have a much better product than my theater had. I mean, my theater had good pretzels, but And when I was employed there, I got a 50% discount on all concessions. So sometimes I bought a pretzel, but that was about it. But yeah, and that's also odd though, because some theaters in some locales in the United States, they're thinking about not selling concessions to reopen because of the health stuff, and I'm like, that's you're not going to make any money that way. But anyway, so is the loss of ticket revenue after day 17 and the loss of concession revenue after day 17 going to be made up by whatever Universal's cutting AMC in on the premium video on demand? Don't know about that. But if this is a non-blockbuster and you're only going to keep it for 3 weekends anyway, and the vast majority of people decide to go see it when it's in the theater, then wait and pay $20 because guess what? If the premium video on demand price is still $20 and it opens in theaters this weekend and I can pay the normal ticket price of $9, or if I have the monthly subscription, if I have your AMC A-List or your Regal, whatever Regal's thing is called now, or you have Alamo. Well, Alamo doesn't care about the theatrical window anyway. If you have that, then it's going to be a lot cheaper to go in. So I'll go in and I'll buy my concessions and stuff. So will this be bad? I mean, it's not going to be bad for Universal. I feel like Universal, if this goes through, they're going to make revenue at the theater. They're going to make revenue premium video on demand. Are they going to make less revenue than if they had just stuck to the 3-month window? I don't know. And I don't think anybody does know until we put this in action. But even then, you're still comparing different movies. You're comparing apples to oranges. You're not comparing apples to apples. So it's very hard to say, like, would this particular movie have made more if we did this as opposed to this? For theaters, I think it's still kind of a loss, but I think AMC is desperate because they need to pay back their loans, and they are very much in danger of getting bankrupt and shutting down. So, like, they've already had to do, like, a debt buy-down and other stuff, so I think this was a deal that was struck due to AMC being desperate. And backing that up is the fact that AMC is the only theater that has signed this deal. So Regal and Cinemark, the other two biggies, Regal is the second biggest in the United States. I don't know where Cinemark ranks in there. But they were like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. We're not signing on to this. And that's going to create a bit of a conundrum. Now, when it comes to this AMC Universal deal, they specifically said they're not releasing every movie at this model, only certain movies. So what that tells me is that the movies that Universal knows they need a longer theatrical revenue to make a profit on, and that's going to be their blockbusters, that's going to be their Fast and Furious 27, that's going to be their new James Bond, their no time to watch this 3-hour James Bond movie. Those movies are probably going to stick to the normal window because they need that scratch. But for, a mid-budget comedy, for a mid-budget action movie, and it will be interesting to see for a low to mid-budget Blumhouse horror movie. Is that what Universal's looking for? Does Universal want to? Do they want to start this with Candyman? Candyman, I think, is the first Universal mid to low budget movie that's set on the release schedule, and that's for mid-October rather. Do they want to start there with Candyman? I don't know. Will they do that for Halloween Kills next year? Well, what's going to be the decision? Because here's the thing: if you have AMC saying yes, we'll do this 17-day window, and you have Regal and Cinemark and a bunch of other, or maybe even independent theaters, and they're like, nah, if you do 17 days, we're not showing that movie, then that means that movie that Universal is deciding to send out to that 17-day, it's only getting played by AMC, and a couple other theaters that care a little bit less about the window, like Alamo, which shows Netflix movies and stuff. I think they have a bit more freedom because they serve like full meals and stuff there. Then at that point, AMC is the big kid on the block. They do have more screens in more parts of the country in front of more people than any other theater chain. So even if you're just stuck to AMC, that's still the largest distributor. But can you make enough money on just AMC theaters alone for those 3 weekends before you go to video on demand? I don't know that, and I'm not sure if Universal knows that either. And it'll be interesting to see, because if the deal with Universal stands, and absolutely no one else signs on to this, except for maybe a couple indie theaters that don't really care, but if that happens, Universal's gonna have to pick a movie to test drive, and whatever movie they test drive, Regal's not gonna play it. Just like when Universal or when AMC cut the deal with Paramount on those 2 movies, Regal did not play either of those movies. Are they going to make enough? Because Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, I believe it was the lowest or second lowest grossing film of that series, bombed, and it killed the series until they're trying to reboot it now. Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, fucking disaster at the box office, completely bombed. Now, maybe it's part of the quality of those movies, but Paranormal Activity at least probably would have done a lot better if it played on more than just AMC. That's my guess. If Universal decides to push out Candyman to just AMC and it doesn't, are they cutting the Achilles heel of that movie? I don't know, and it will be interesting to see what movie Universal decides to do that for. I mean, also, this all presumes that Universal is upfront and says what movies are fitting that 17 days. Like, if they say, like, oh, we're gonna honor the window, the 3-month window, and then they release it, and 3 weekends later, it's like, nah, we're pulling it back, we're putting it on video on demand, and Regal has already played that, Regal's going to be like, fuck you, we can't trust you, we're not playing any Universal movies at all now. So I don't think Universal is going to play that game, but they could. They could try, but I don't think they're going to do that, because I don't think they want to risk the downside of that. Because Regal's owned by a British company, Cineworld, so they're in a bit better of a financial situation. I forget who owns Cinemark, but some of these other theaters, they're, even with the amount of time they've been shut down, they're not in as desperate times as AMC is. AMC expanded too far too fast. AMC is also owned by a Chinese parent company, so I guess they should just be lucky that Trump's not going after them like he is TikTok. So that's my thoughts. Do I think the 17-day window will hurt movie theaters in general and lead to the death of the movie theater and the movie theater experience? Not as it's set up right now, because again, the theaters aren't signing up for this, and I can't see, like, if Universal decided to do this for a big blockbuster, like let's say they had the cojones to do this for James Bond in November, assuming it sticks to November. No Time to Die, James Bond ends up opening in AMC theaters for 3 weeks, 3 weekends, and no other theater plays it. Well, if you're an audience and it's November, let's assume things have gotten better with COVID, and you want to flock to a theater, that's going to pull all of the revenue to one theater chain that wants to see it right away on the big screen because it's James Bond. So it's a movie that people might want the theatrical experience for as opposed to watching at home. And then the other theaters are not going to have much because most studios have pushed their shit into 2021 at this point. There's a very empty 4 months there at the back end of this year. Maybe they do that. I don't think they will. I think Universal is just going to try this for low and mid-budgeted films, and since the Blumhouse Universal stuff tends to leg out at the box office, like Get Out making $200 million or whatever it did, I'm not sure if they try it with that, because I do think that if you pull a movie that could potentially have legs at 3 weekends and you stick it on premium video on demand at that point, I do think you are cutting back from the amount of money you can make on that. But that's just me. I mean, or it could be that this premium on demand video thing works because the movie theaters are just going to be dead, because even when they reopen, people aren't going to feel safe. So they won't go back. There's a lot of question marks, and it'll be interesting to see. So, couple last things. I'm not going to go over all of the different movie release changes that have happened since the last time I talked about them. But as I mentioned, Bill and Ted is going to drop on premium video on demand and drive-ins and stuff a little bit earlier. It's going to be late August, like August 28th, I think, instead of September 1st. Antebellum, which was briefly on the calendar almost by accident as the first movie to be released when the theaters reopen, they're skipping domestic theaters entirely and going completely premium video on demand, which I was very disappointed about. As far as when theaters are reopening, the National Association of Theater Owners, which is one of the two organizations that's called NATO, the other one is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but the movie NATO, they actually have a publicly available Google Doc, and I'll put a link in the description below, and that Google Doc has a list of all the different state requirements for movie theaters, as including dates that they're allowed to reopen, and what the capacity stuff is, and all that stuff. And surprisingly, a lot of theaters are technically allowed to open, at least on state and local levels right now. A lot of them. There's only maybe like 4 states in DC that can't. There's like California can't, New York can't, New Jersey can't, Washington DC can't, and I might be forgetting one other thing. As far as like can't reopen and no date for reopening set. But most of the reopening dates are kind of set for August 21st or August 28th. Well, actually, a lot of them were set for late July, actually. It's just that the only product that's out there is library titles, so the chains have decided that it's going to be mid to late August now. In my state of North Carolina, theaters can't open until our Phase 3, and our Phase 2 has been pushed back to September 11th. So the very earliest that theaters will open in my state is 9/11. And that puts me in the very bad position of desperately waiting for 9/11 to happen. That's a horrible way to phrase it. 9/11 also happens to be the day that Marilyn Manson's new album comes out too, so pick another day, people, please. I don't want to look forward to 9/11. It's horrible. All right. So even if movie theaters in most of the country, in like 80% of the country, open by August 21st, when Unhinged is supposed to open, and New Mutants on the 28th, I think, and Tenet on September 3rd or 4th, the earliest I'll be able to see them is Friday, September 11th. And that might also not stick with COVID going the way it is, so who the fuck knows. God damn it. Anyway, so... Alright, and lastly, my birthday is in August, and if you're on Facebook, as soon as it hits your birthday month, Facebook is like,
hey, you want to do a fundraiser for a charity you care about, huh? You want to do a charity fundraiser? You want to raise some money for a charity?
So, sorry about that. So, I've decided to do a fundraiser for AGFA, the American Genre Film Archive. Is this sexy? No. So I'm going to put a link below. If you'd like to donate to AGFA for my birthday fundraiser, you can click the link, and I guess you can do it that way. AGFA they're kind of a non-profit charity offshoot of the Alamo Drafthouse, where their goal is mainly collecting, restoring, and preserving genre films. So horror, exploitation, stuff like that. Movies that normally aren't cared for by like Criterion and stuff like that. Obviously I love movies. Movies are my life. I care about the preservation of film, especially genre films that I love. So if you also care about that and you'd like to donate a little bit to that nonprofit organization, feel free. Other than that, I believe I've talked enough about this issue, and I'm sure as soon as I hit stop and I go to edit it and I upload it to YouTube, there'll be 9 other new news items that come out on this sleepy Saturday that I'm recording this. God damn it. I hate this fucking year.